I am on the line right now with my friend Joe Serio. We've known each other about 8 years, I think, and we have worked together on 4 or 5 of Joe's books and are currently working on his new book about his years as a young man working in Russia with the KGB, and it is terrific. And we're just going to talk a little bit about our process of working together. How are you, Joe?
I'm doing great. I'm doing great, Jim. Thanks. So, yeah, listen, before we launch into this, you mentioned that we've worked on a few books together, and I love working with you. I mean, I love even just talking to you because you make me laugh and you make me smile, and it makes the whole process, writing process and everything else so much easier. So it's kind of like, you have that friendly face on the other end that, you're not going to get beaten up by. And that's how I've told you this before. That's how I always feel about you. And it's just fun.
Well, and vice versa. And we have such wonderfully different personalities. You've got the kind of New York Italian. I'm the Southern Methodist kind of guy. And we have this wonderful combo there. And the most important part is that I really love taking what you've got and having a look at it and giving you suggestions that might make it better. And
yeah.
I think we've been able to do that.
Oh, we've done it brilliantly. I mean, you've given me so many things. We worked on my earlier series of books that are written really economically. So they're 50 lessons, right? The 50 lesson series. And the thing that is that you're so laser focused on words and feeling, and even how the punctuation influences the feeling. So for those kinds of books, it was so critical for me to, have somebody like that who just like tightened up. And what I find out writing a longer book is that the same thing is required, right? It's always about tightening up. I don't care if you're writing 400 pages or 100 pages or 50 pages or whatever. You can't really ramble. You can't ramble that much. It really has to be tight, and you have to select your words, and you're great at helping me, understand where I'm going, and then just kind of tighten up things as I'm going.
What I always try to do in any kind of writing that I work with a client is I try to be the reader, or if it's a speech, the listener. And anything that stops me or confuses me or makes me wonder or throws me off, I want to stop and fix it. And so that's when I write those large notes with big X's and whatever. I also want them to know things that I love. So that's when I put those stars. And I litter your work with stars and X's. And we go back and look at the X's, and I ask questions, and then you help it fix it. And that's the key. Because if I get it, I always tell people, if I get it, America gets it. Because I'm just a really average reader. And if it's clear to me, it'll be clear to most people.
Yeah, and I love the fact that, number one, you say immediately if it's not clear. And number two, before you start mentioning the notes on my pages, that's exactly what I was thinking of. Like, there are two things I think of with you. One is how large your notes are on the page and your, the support. And I love this. And I love, just the general enthusiasm, because you get excited about stuff that's good, right? You're not the teacher with the red pen who's never writing good on the page. It's like you get super excited. And I know while I'm writing, I have you in my head, and I'm thinking to myself, is this sentence, does this paragraph, does this page stop the reader along the way? Even if grammar calls for a comma, but the comma is going to stop Jim in his path, then I'm going to leave the comma out, because there's a flow, right? And you're really good about rhythm and flow and momentum and all that we've done this enough that I think about you while I'm writing. And I'm like, oh, do I want that comma? Should that be there? What would Jim say, right? WWJD, right?
Well, I believe, because I'm a writer too, I believe that we need to know when we're doing it right. I know I want to know when I'm really in my groove. And I think it's just as important for the people I work with. When they're doing something wonderful, I want to go, yes, give me more. This is it. I love this. And then when it's confusing, I just want them to know it is confusing. And how can you help me understand it? Whatever that means. Does it need a transition? Does it need getting rid of jargon? Does it need explanation? Whatever it is, help me get it. Because if it's important to you, it's got to be important to say it right.
And writing generally, and certain kinds of writing in particular, like novels or autobiographies or whatever, writers are, at least in my mind, notoriously sensitive people. This is delicate stuff, right? So writers are people who are already delving inside of our feelings, our experiences. We're trying to put something on paper. We're worried about people rejecting us. We've got all this, is it good enough garbage in our heads? And to have somebody who understands that, right? And to have somebody with your sense of humor, but also your critical eye, to understand that and come to us with kid gloves, but also knowing that the hard stuff's going to come, right? The corrections are going to come, but it doesn't feel like I'm getting bludgeoned. And it doesn't feel like, honestly, it doesn't trigger that thing in your head that says, oh my God, I'll never be able to do this. I'm worthless as a writer. No one will like this, right? All of that goes away for me when I'm dealing with you.
Good, because I want the author to know when they're good and how great it is when they're sharing stories or experiences or insights. I want to celebrate that. And then the places where they haven't got it yet, how can we make it work? How can we make it clearer? How can we touch the reader?
Just having this conversation, I'm getting excited to go write. I mean,
good, because I've been wanting you to finish that book.
Every time I talk to you, there's just so much enthusiasm in your voice, even during the criticisms. Like, it's just effusive and it's so supportive, and it makes a scary process so far less scary. And I just love that about you. I love that about you in terms of the person you are and the writing coach you are, and it just makes the whole thing more doable.
Oh, well, thank you, because that's what I want to do, because I know that's what I need as a writer.
Yeah.
I need what I give, because I know how scary it is to write. And my very first book, I don't think I've ever said this to anybody. My very first book, and when I was in New York, I was an actor. I was writing a book called How to Survive a Roommate, based on all the horrible roommates I had. And I'd had a bunch. And I had an old friend from college who was living in New York. I would meet her for lunch and read her chapters and get her feedback. And she was kind and gentle, but also pointed. And I wrote the book through those lunches. So I'm kind of recreating that experience that happened in my 20s.
Yeah, it's awesome. And the only thing I can say is I will always be grateful. You always have a place in my heart for what you do for me and what you give me permission to do for myself, to get the words out and to find the poignant moment that, I mean, I'm thinking about the specific thing in the book I'm working on now. And you said, hey, you can't just mention this in passing and this shockingly emotional piece. You got to go back and tell us about it, because I, Jim Comer, as the reader, I need to know about that. I want to know what happened there. And I went back and fleshed it all out. And it's super critical for writers to hear that, because we're just in our heads and we know what we lived and we know what we experienced, but we don't really know how the other person, our partner, the reader, feels about it or thinks about it, because this is their first experience with it. Whereas we may have run it around in our heads 100 times. It's a totally different experience for me than it is for you reading it the first time. And you say, hey, don't shortchange me. Don't shortchange. Give me that emotion. I want to feel something here. I love that. And it makes my writing better.
And I know exactly the point you're talking about in the book. I remember that point. Exactly.
Yeah.
Has to do with Dad, right?
Yeah, it does.
Yes,
and
indeed.
Not only did I flesh out the scene we were talking about, but I found other places earlier in the book to kind of introduce the concept of him, and what our relationship was like, even though it had nothing to do with, the Russian mafia. in what the book is about, but it was this underlying emotional thing that was in my life that came out as a result of living in Russia. So yeah, it was a great value add on your part.
Well, this has been terrific. I only have one more thing to say to you. Finish the book. I can't wait to get together again.
You know, I've come to learn that it doesn't matter if you've done 10 or 20 books. It just doesn't. If this book isn't finished, I got you to remind me about it.
Thanks, Joe. I really appreciate it.
It's my pleasure. Always my pleasure.